The Christmas Country Club murder mystery, Eleanor Whitmore's cold case in Chicago. It was the kind of night when the snow seemed to fall in deliberate silence. As if even the weather knew something terrible was about to happen. Blank. The Lakeview Country Club looked like a mansion lifted out of a glossy holiday magazine. Its tall Georgian windows spilled golden light across the snow-covered lawn. Where a row of black town cars idled, their exhaust rising like ghosts into the Chicago winter air. Inside, Christmas garlands coiled around marble columns. A tree taller than a man glittered with silver ornaments. And the air hummed with the mingled sound of jazz, laughter, and clinking glasses. Eleanor Whitmore, wrapped in a shawl of muted green wool, moved with careful steps across the parquet floor. At 74, she had learned how to blend in, present enough to be polite, invisible enough to be underestimated. Most saw only a widowed librarian with a fondness for tea and mystery novels. Nobody suspected that Eleanor, behind her soft eyes and folded hands, noticed the things others missed, the silence after a too-pointed remark, the flicker of nerves when someone's lie slipped too easily. She accepted a glass of punch from Alice Carter, the minister's niece working the event in a neat black and white uniform. "Careful, Mrs. Whitmore," Alice whispered with a grin. "It's stronger than it looks." Eleanor smiled. "The more harmless it appears, the more dangerous it usually is." Alice laughed, not realizing how literal that truth would soon become. Blank. At the center of attention was Richard Halston, the sort of man who never just entered a room, he occupied it. Tall, fastidious, with hair slicked back so firmly it looked lacquered, Halston was known for two things: his ruthless business sense and his habit of correcting everyone else's mistakes. Whether in contracts, golf swings, or even grammar, tonight, in his crisp dinner jacket and a red silk tie, he looked every inch the master of ceremonies. Another splendid year at Lakeview, Halston declared to a small circle of listeners near the punch bowl. And a prosperous one, provided some of us remember their obligations. His eyes lingered just a fraction too long on Martin Devereux, the club's unofficial legal advisor, whose smile froze like ice on glass. Devereux muttered something under his breath, but Halston was already turning to Lady Havenshaw, an aging socialite who insisted on bringing old-world manners to Chicago. She beamed at Halston, pretending not to notice the growing discomfort in the air. Nearby, Clara Fletcher stood alone, draped in black velvet that set off her pale face and bright lips. A widow recently returned from New York. She was striking in a way that made people talk. Rumors swirled around her like perfume: debts, affairs, investments gone bad. She caught Eleanor watching her and offered a smile too sharp to be genuine. Eleanor tucked the observation away. Blank. The evening flowed with practiced elegance, carols from the hired quartet, silver trays of hors d'oeuvre, champagne corks popping in the lounge. But beneath it all ran a current of unease. Eleanor felt it in the way people avoided Halston, in the nervous laughter that followed his barbed jokes, in the way Martin Devereux's hand tightened around his glass whenever Halston's voice rose. Then it happened. Halston ladled himself a generous cup of punch from the great silver bowl. The liquid glowed ruby under the chandeliers, fragrant with citrus and spice. He raised the cup high in a mock toast, smirked at Devereux, and drank deeply. Moments later, his face drained of color. His eyes widened, his mouth opened as if to curse or protest. But no words came. The cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the parquet. Gasps erupted around the room. Halston staggered, clutched his chest, and collapsed in the hallway leading to the cloakroom. "Richard!" Lady Havenshaw shrieked, rushing forward. Dr. Thomas Avery, the local physician, knelt at Halston's side within seconds. Eleanor pushed closer, unnoticed in the chaos, her sharp eyes catching the smallest details, the way Halston's lips trembled blue, the faint bitter odor on his breath, the panic in Clara Fletcher's eyes before she masked it with a hand to her mouth. After a tense minute, Dr. Avery looked up, his expression grave. "He's gone." The golden glow of Christmas lights suddenly seemed garish, mocking. The room, moments ago filled with chatter, now buzzed with whispers. Eleanor stood still, her mind already at work. Something had just begun. By midnight, the club was no longer a place of celebration but a crime scene. Police arrived in thick coats dusted with snow, led by Detective Harold Graves, a solid man with a bulldog jaw and a voice that carried authority without effort. Everyone stays put until we get statements. Graves barked. This isn't just a fainting spell. Dr. Avery, the physician, nodded grimly. Symptoms suggest digitalis poisoning. Fast acting. He wouldn't have had more than a few minutes once he drank it. Whispers sharpened into accusations. Poison. Murder. At Christmas. Graves narrowed his eyes at the punch bowl. Nobody touches that again. Alice Carter, pale but steady, raised her hand. Sir, I think Mr. Halston switched seats tonight. The name cards were moved around to make space for extra guests. He wasn't supposed to sit where he did. Eleanor caught the detail like a net catches a fish. Not supposed to sit there. Then maybe, not supposed to drink that glass. Graves, however, zeroed in on the most obvious suspect. Devereaux, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. You and Halston had words earlier. Strong words. Devereaux stiffened. Disagreements. Yes, but I wouldn't. You wouldn't poison him, Graves challenged. Funny, because I hear Halston was ready to expose some irregularities in your accounts. That'd be motive enough. Clara Fletcher stepped forward, her voice smooth but a shade too rehearsed. Detective, Richard had enemies everywhere. He collected debts like trophies. Anyone could have wanted him gone. Anyone. Her gaze slid across the room, implicating everyone and no one. Eleanor noted the maneuver. Deflecting suspicion was an art, and Clara wielded it with a skilled hand. Blank, underscore, blank. As the investigation tightened, the night stretched longer, the snow piling higher outside. Eleanor sat quietly near the window, watching frost bloom across the glass while inside. Tempers flared. A burned scrap of paper was found in the lounge fireplace, Halston's company letterhead still visible, with words like transfer of assets and discrepancies. The discovery deepened suspicion against Devereaux. Then, near dawn, Clara Fletcher claimed she'd been attacked at her home after leaving the club briefly to compose herself. A broken window, scattered papers, a letter half smeared with ink, clues pointing towards Sir Jonathan Renshaw, Halston's old rival in real estate dealings. It was too much. Too quickly, Eleanor thought. Coincidences stacked neatly like dominoes. Too neat. She remembered her own words to Alice earlier. The more harmless it looks, the more dangerous it usually is. Tonight, the danger wasn't in the punch, it was in the lies swirling around the room. And Eleanor Whitmore, unnoticed by most, resolved to see past every disguise. Blank, underscore, blank. The snow outside had not stopped since Richard Halston fell dead on the parquet floor. By morning, the Lakeview Country Club looked like an island stranded in a white sea. The roads buried, the silence outside as oppressive as the murmurs inside. Detective Harold Graves ran the investigation with the steady aggression of a man used to answers falling into his lap. He liked suspects with obvious motives. And in his mind, Martin Devereaux fit the role too cleanly. Eleanor Whitmore, however, had learned long ago that life, especially human nature, rarely arranged itself so neatly. Blank, underscore, blank. The first interrogations. Mr. Devereaux, Graves said, looming over the lawyer who sat hunched in a leather armchair near the fireplace. Why don't you tell me what you and Halston argued about tonight? Devereaux's lips tightened. He was a man in his 50s, balding at the crown, with the weary look of someone who had negotiated too many contracts and lost too much sleep. We had business disagreements. Yes. He threatened to expose certain creative strategies in my client accounts. But arguments are not poison. Detective, you're saying you had no intention of silencing him. I'm saying, Devereaux replied, his voice rising, that he embarrassed me tonight in front of half the town. If I were to strike him, it wouldn't be by slipping powder into his glass. It would be with my fists. Graves smirked. I'm not sure that's the defense you think it is. Eleanor, seated nearby with her knitting bag resting discreetly on her lap, caught the tremor in Devereaux's hand. Not fear of guilt, she thought, but fear of exposure. Devereaux was hiding something, but perhaps not murder. Blank, underscore, blank. Clara Fletcher, by contrast, played the role of cooperative widow to perfection. She leaned forward as Graves questioned her, her jeweled fingers twisting the string of pearls around her neck. Mrs. Fletcher, Graves said, you reported being attacked at your home this evening. Can you describe your assailant? Her eyes widened, lashes fluttering. It was dark. I barely had time to scream. A man rushed me near the window, knocked over my lamp, and fled. I think he wanted my papers. Richard's papers. He entrusted me with some confidential documents recently. You see, they've been, oh God, stolen. Jonathan Renshaw shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the mention of documents. The tall, patrician businessman with salt and pepper hair carried himself with the entitlement of old money. Graves noticed. So did Eleanor. Funny, Graves said slowly, how every time suspicion moves. You're ready with a new piece of evidence. Mrs. Fletcher, first Devereux, now Renshaw. Clara's lips parted in wounded shock. Detective, are you implying I would manufacture my own assault? My window was broken. For heaven's sake. Eleanor studied her. Clara's performance was flawless, except for the pearls. She twisted them so tightly against her skin that faint red marks had appeared. An unconscious gesture, Eleanor thought, pressure building beneath the mask. Blank, underscore, blank. A question of target. Later, when the storm calmed enough for people to gather in the lounge, Eleanor found herself near Alice Carter. The young woman was still pale, but her hands were steady as she poured coffee for the guests. Miss Carter, Eleanor said gently, earlier you mentioned the seating arrangement changed tonight. Who decided that? Alice hesitated. Lady Havenshaw. Ma'am, she wanted to make room for 2 late arrivals. The name cards had to be shifted around. Mr. Halston wasn't supposed to sit where he did. Eleanor sipped her coffee thoughtfully. And did he take his own glass? Yes, ma'am. He just picked up the one in front of him. Which meant the poisoned cup, if it was indeed a single cup and not the whole bowl, was never meant for Halston. He had, quite by accident, taken another man's place at the table of fate. But who had been the true target? And why had no one else noticed the danger? Blank, underscore, blank. A scrap of paper. Detective Graves presented the burned scrap of Halston's company letterhead found in the lounge fireplace. The fragment bore enough legible words: transfer, assets, irregularities, to fuel speculation. Looks like Devereux again, Graves said, holding it up. Halston was preparing to expose your little accounting tricks. Devereux bristled. That scrap proves nothing. Anybody could have put it there. Convenient, though, that it turned up in the same room where you were seen arguing with him. Eleanor leaned forward. Detective, if I may, doesn't it strike you as peculiar how neatly this evidence appears? As though someone wanted it discovered. Graves frowned. What are you suggesting, Mrs. Whitmore? Only that real evidence tends to hide itself. Manufactured evidence, on the other hand, practically begs for attention. The room fell silent. Graves eyed her with mild irritation. He had no patience for amateur philosophers. But Eleanor saw Clara Fletcher's shoulders stiffen ever so slightly. Blank, underscore, blank. The cordial incident. By mid-afternoon, just as fatigue and fear began to settle into the club like stale cigar smoke, a new commotion erupted. Mrs. Margaret Devereux, Martin's wife, suddenly swooned after drinking from a small glass of cherry cordial. She was laid out on a sofa, her skin flushed, her breathing shallow. Panic rippled through the room. Dr. Avery rushed to her side, examined her quickly, and then announced, "It isn't poison, a sedative, perhaps, enough to unsettle, not to kill," but the effect was achieved nonetheless. Whispers surged. Another attempt, another warning. Graves rounded on Devereux. Your wife was the one targeted now. Care to explain why someone keeps trying to kill the Devereux family? Devereux threw up his hands. I have no idea. She barely touches alcohol. That cordial was offered to her by Mrs. Fletcher, wasn't it? All eyes turned to Clara. She pressed her hand to her heart. I was only being kind. I poured it myself. Yes, but I would never harm Margaret. Why would I? Her voice trembled with just the right amount of outrage. Almost too right, Eleanor thought. Blank, underscore, blank. Eleanor's quiet watch, while Graves stormed about issuing orders. Eleanor drifted quietly through the club, speaking little, observing much. She noted how Clara always inserted herself into the center of speculation, steering suspicion like a rudder. She noted how Renshaw grew increasingly uneasy, as though holding back some private guilt. She noted how Devereux's anger masked a deeper terror of financial ruin. Most of all, she noted the pattern. Each new clue pointed away from Clara. The burned paper, Devereux. The attack, Renshaw. The cordial, back to Devereux. It was too orchestrated, too deliberate. Real life rarely choreographed itself so perfectly. Eleanor thought of the pearls again, biting into Clara's neck. Blank, underscore, blank. an uneasy conversation. That evening, as storm clouds thinned and the roads began to open, Eleanor found herself in the library with Clara Fletcher. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the shelves. "You've been very brave today," Eleanor said mildly. Clara smiled thinly. "Bravery has little to do with it. Survival, perhaps. When one has lived in New York, one learns to survive. Survival often requires ingenuity and quick thinking." Eleanor's eyes lingered on the pearls. "You seem to have both." Clara tilted her head. "Is that a compliment, Mrs. Whitmore, or a suspicion?" "Why not both?" Eleanor said softly. "You do realize, of course, that Halston wasn't meant to die tonight. He took a glass intended for someone else. That changes everything." For just an instant, Clara's mask faltered. The firelight caught the tension in her jaw, the sudden hardness in her eyes. Then the smile returned. "What an interesting theory," she murmured. "But dangerous, perhaps, to play detective. Leave that to the police." "Dear," Eleanor said nothing, but in her heart she knew she had touched the nerve. Blank, underscore, blank. Graves' blind spot. By the following day, Graves was preparing warrants, convinced Devereux had orchestrated everything. His case seemed airtight: motive, opportunity, and now a chain of evidence. Eleanor tried once more to intervene. "Detective, if you charge Mr. Devereux, you may find yourself chasing shadows. The real culprit is clever. Too clever. They will keep manufacturing evidence until you no longer see the truth." Graves sighed. "Mrs. Whitmore, with respect, you're a retired schoolteacher. I'm a detective with 20 years on the force. I don't need parlor theories about human behavior, I need hard facts." Eleanor only smiled faintly. "Facts can lie, detective. People rarely can." She left him to his paperwork. Some truths could not be forced. They had to be revealed. Blank, underscore, blank. A chain about to break. That night, during a small gathering arranged to soothe nerves, Eleanor observed Clara once more. A conversation about fate and chance arose, and Eleanor deliberately steered it toward the matter of Halston's seat being changed. "Imagine," Eleanor said aloud, her voice calm but cutting through the chatter. "If Halston hadn't sat where he did, someone else would have drunk from that glass. Someone else would be dead. Fortune can be cruel, or kind, depending on your perspective." The room grew quiet. All eyes turned toward Eleanor. Clara's hand shot to her pearls. She twisted them so violently that the strand nearly snapped, the beads pressing into her skin until her throat reddened. It was only a gesture, fleeting and unnoticed by most. But Eleanor saw it, and she knew. Some chains break under pressure. Some masks crack when chance intrudes. And Clara Fletcher was very close to breaking. Blank, underscore, blank. The storm broke with a brittle dawn. Snowplows carved trenches through Lakeview's roads, leaving grey slush piled high against sidewalks. The Lakeview Country Club, though no longer barricaded by weather, remained locked down by suspicion. Nobody left, not until Detective Graves gave permission. Eleanor Whitmore, however, was not in a hurry to leave. Her years had taught her patience. Truth, like a stubborn book's spine, yielded only when coaxed, and Eleanor was a master coaxer. Blank, underscore, blank. Graves presses forward. Detective Harold Graves paced the lounge with a cigar stub clenched in his teeth. "We're close," he announced to no one in particular. "Devereux thinks he's clever, but he left fingerprints all over this." Martin Devereux sat nearby, pale and gaunt, his wife resting beside him, still weak from the cordial incident. "I'm telling you, detective, I had nothing to do with Richard's death." His voice cracked. "He was my adversary, yes, but killing him would only worsen my situation. Yet his death conveniently silences the man who threatened to expose you." Graves replied. Devereux buried his face in his hands. "You don't understand. He wasn't the only one who knew. Others knew too. Others." Graves pounced. "Who else?" But Devereux shut down, clamming up with the stubbornness of a man who feared ruin more than death. Eleanor noted it carefully. Devereux wasn't lying. He was terrified. But his fear wasn't of poison, it was of exposure. Blank, underscore, blank. Clara's subtle games. Clara Fletcher floated through the day like a dark swan, always near the center of attention, always speaking just enough to plant seeds of suspicion. To Alice Carter, she whispered about Devereux's accounts. To Lady Havenshaw, she hinted about Renshaw's secret dealings with Halston. To Graves, she confided her fear that she was next. that Halston had entrusted her with his darkest secrets. Every word added another brushstroke to the portrait she wanted painted. And yet, Eleanor noticed, Clara never once expressed grief over Halston himself. Not sorrow, not shock, only strategy. The pearls around her neck gleamed like shackles. Blank, _ blank. A visit to Halston's office. In the late afternoon, Graves finally allowed a search of Halston's private office upstairs at the club, a place he maintained as his second home. Eleanor, though not officially invited, drifted in with the others. The room smelled of old cigars and leather polish. Mahogany shelves lined with finance ledgers. Photographs of Halston shaking hands with businessmen. A desk stacked with correspondence. Graves rifled through drawers. "Look at this," he muttered, pulling out a ledger with several pages torn out. "Records missing. Convenient for Devereaux, or convenient for someone who wants us to think so," Eleanor murmured. Clara leaned over the desk. Richard was meticulous. He never misplaced a page. Whoever removed them had reason to hide the truth. Her voice quivered with righteous indignation. But Eleanor caught the flicker in Clara's eyes as she glanced toward the fireplace, where ashes lay cold and grey. She already burned something, Eleanor thought, and now she's pointing elsewhere. Blank, _ blank. An unwelcome revelation. That evening, Jonathan Renshaw finally cracked. The man had been pacing all day, refusing food, snapping at anyone who approached. At dinner, he slammed his fork onto the table. "Fine, yes. Halston and I were in negotiations over a property deal. Yes, he threatened to ruin me. But I didn't poison him." Graves arched a brow. "Why not? Plenty of motive there." "Because," Renshaw said, voice shaking with fury, "I already signed away the property to him yesterday. I had nothing left to lose. Nothing to gain by killing him." He rose, knocking over his chair. "If you want a villain, look at Clara Fletcher. She had debts up to her ears in New York. Halston found out. He told me so himself." The room fell silent, all eyes on Clara. She didn't flinch. She simply smiled, that practiced, sorrowful smile. "Jonathan, you're grasping at straws. Your anger betrays you more than my debts betray me." But Eleanor saw the truth in Renshaw's words. For a moment, Clara's hand tightened again around those pearls, strangling herself in silence. Blank, _ blank. Eleanor's deduction. Later, in the quiet of the library, Eleanor pieced the puzzle together. She sat with her notebook open, lines of neat cursive spilling across the page. Halston not the intended victim. Seat changed. Glass not his. Clara orchestrates diversions. Burned letter. Attack. Cordial. Devereaux, guilty of financial misdeeds. But not murder. Renshaw, ruined already. Rage without purpose. Fletcher debts. Motive strong. Behavior, pearls. Deflections. Too perfect grief. The conclusion formed like ink bleeding across paper. Clara Fletcher planned to silence Halston. Or perhaps Renshaw. But fate intervened. Her web of false clues only proved her guilt. But proving it to others, that required finesse. Blank, _ blank. A dangerous conversation. Eleanor approached Clara in the drawing room, where the widow lounged with a brandy in hand. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the flawless mask she wore. "You must be exhausted," Eleanor said kindly. Clara sighed. "Exhausted? Yes. Frightened. More so. To think Richard's murderer still walks free among us." "Perhaps not free," Eleanor said softly. "Perhaps only desperate." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You speak as though you know something." Eleanor leaned closer. "Only that guilt shows itself in curious ways. In tightened pearls. In too many stories too well rehearsed." For the first time, Clara's smile slipped. "Careful, Mrs. Whitmore. You may think yourself a clever old woman, but cleverness can be dangerous." Eleanor met her gaze unflinchingly. Second desperation. Blank, _ blank. Graves' near mistake. That night, Graves prepared his report. "I'll have Devereaux in custody by morning," he told the group grimly. "The evidence stacks too high." Eleanor spoke up. "Detective, you are about to make a terrible mistake. Arresting the wrong man only gives the real murderer time to cover their tracks." Graves bristled. "You've offered me theories, Mrs. Whitmore. I deal in facts." Eleanor smiled faintly. "And yet your facts keep falling exactly where the murderer wants them. Doesn't that trouble you?" Graves muttered but did not answer. Blank, _ blank. The net tightens. The following day brought a grim calm. The roads were clear, but Graves still held everyone in the club until he could finalize charges. Suspense clung to the walls like smoke. Clara Fletcher remained poised, though Eleanor noticed her pacing more, drinking more brandy, fiddling constantly with those pearls. The mask was cracking. During lunch, Eleanor dropped her quiet bombshell. "I believe," she said to the assembled group, "that Richard Halston's death was an accident." The room froze. "Accident?" Graves barked. "Not by natural causes." Eleanor continued. "By design. Yes, but not his design. The poisoned glass was meant for another. The change of seats saved the intended victim and doomed Halston." A ripple of shock spread across the room. Devereux paled. Renshaw clenched his jaw. Clara gripped her pearls so hard the strand creaked audibly. "And," Eleanor added calmly, "the one person who knew enough, who had motive enough, and who has since worked hardest to misdirect suspicion." Her eyes rested on Clara. "Is Mrs. Fletcher?" Clara laughed. Too loudly. "Preposterous. You're accusing me based on, what? Pearls and innuendo?" Eleanor only smiled. "Not accusing. Observing. And observations. Dear, rarely lie. Blank, underscore, blank." The breaking point. That night, Eleanor prepared her trap. She asked Lady Havenshaw to host a small gathering in the lounge. To restore harmony, drinks were poured, fire crackled, conversation flowed uneasy. Eleanor waited until the moment was right. Then, with a voice calm as winter air, she spoke. "Imagine, for a moment, that Richard Halston had lived. Imagine the true victim had drunk from the intended glass. The murderer would have succeeded. But fate, capricious as it is, switched the seats. The wrong man died." The words hung like smoke. Clara's face drained of color. Her hand twisted the pearls once, twice, tighter and tighter. A bead popped free, bouncing across the floor. She gasped, clutching at the broken strand as the pearls scattered like spilled secrets. Everyone watched in stunned silence. Eleanor leaned forward gently. "And there, Mrs. Fletcher, is your mask breaking. Blank, underscore, blank." The room erupted. Graves barked orders. Devereux muttered prayers. Renshaw stared in stunned relief. Clara clutched the remnants of her pearls. Eyes wild, her perfect poise shattered. Eleanor sat back, serene. The truth, she knew, always revealed itself. And this was only the beginning. Blank, underscore, blank. The pearls scattered across the lounge floor like hailstones, rolling into corners, bouncing beneath chairs. The sound echoed in the stunned silence that followed Eleanor's calm pronouncement. Clara Fletcher, her mask fractured, stood clutching the broken strand as if strangling herself with her own jewels. Detective Graves cleared his throat, trying to wrest control. "That's enough theatrics. A woman breaks her necklace, and suddenly she's a killer. We need evidence." Mrs. Whitmore, not symbolism, but his words lacked conviction. Everyone had seen Clara's reaction. Clara straightened, composure returning with frightening speed. "Really, Eleanor, must you dramatize?" I was startled. "Nothing more. A clumsy necklace hardly proves murder." She forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "Richard's death was tragic, yes, but this witch hunt is worse." Eleanor didn't answer. She simply folded her hands in her lap, serene, letting silence sharpen its blade. Blank, underscore, blank. Graves doubts. Clara regroups. Later, Graves cornered Eleanor in the library. "You can't just accuse a woman in front of half the club without proof. If this goes sideways, it's my head." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "You want proof? Watch her. A guilty conscience will not rest. She will try again, or slip again, or both." Graves shook his head. "You expect me to gamble on psychology? I expect you to trust human nature. Guilt is a leash no one can slip forever." Graves muttered curses but didn't argue further. Meanwhile, Clara regrouped. She drank brandy by the fire, comforted by sympathetic whispers from Lady Havenshaw, who still clung to the idea of her innocence. To others, Clara presented herself as the victim of Eleanor's malice. Her voice trembled in just the right places. Her eyes shone with just the right tears. But when she thought no one was looking, her face hardened into something colder, hungrier. Eleanor saw it, though, she always did. Blank, underscore, blank. The second attempt. 2 nights later, the storm cleared completely. The roads out of Lakeview were open again. Graves announced he would begin releasing guests the following morning, though he intended to take Devereux into custody before they left. That night, however, a scream shattered the midnight calm. Guests rushed from their rooms to find Alice Carter, the young waitress, collapsed in the corridor outside the kitchen. Her tray of glasses lay shattered across the floor. She writhed, clutching her throat, gasping. Poison, someone shouted. She's been poisoned. Graves shoved through the crowd, kneeling beside her. Get the doctor. Dr. Hayes came running, administering an emetic and forcing water down Alice's throat. Within minutes, she was breathing easier, though weak and pale. What happened? Graves demanded. Alice whispered. I was taking the tray to Mrs. Fletcher's room. She asked for cordial. I tasted it first, just to be sure it hadn't soured. Then I couldn't breathe. All eyes turned to Clara. Clara stood frozen, face pale as chalk. Then she found her voice. That's absurd. I never asked for cordial. She must have misunderstood. But Eleanor knew better. Clara had ordered it, intending to stage another fright, just as she had with Mrs. Devereux. This time, though, the wrong girl had tasted the trap. Blank, underscore, blank. Eleanor's quiet calculus. Back in her room, Eleanor sat at the small desk, ink pen scratching across her notebook. First death, Halston, by accident. Second attempt, Mrs. Devereux. Sedative not poison. Third attempt, Alice. Nearly fatal. Pattern clear. Clara fabricates threats when suspicion closes in. But this last attempt revealed something new. Clara was no longer merely misdirecting, she was desperate enough to silence. A cornered animal would strike, no matter how refined its manners. Eleanor tapped her pen. It was time to end this before another innocent suffered. Blank, underscore, blank. Graves nearly collapses the case. The next morning, Graves announced his decision. Martin Devereux. You're coming with me to the precinct. You'll answer for this in court. Gasps filled the lounge. Devereux's wife sobbed, clutching his arm. Harold, please, she begged. He's no murderer. Graves remained firm. His accounts, the burned letter, Halston's threats, everything points to him. Eleanor rose slowly from her chair. Detective Graves, if you take Martin Devereux, you will deliver the real murderer her victory, and you will doom your case when the truth emerges. Graves bristled. You think you know better than the law? I know people, detective. You chase paper trails, I chase souls. And souls leave clearer tracks. She looked around the room. Let us settle this here, tonight, before we all leave and scatter into the city. Blank, underscore, blank. The trap is set. That evening, Eleanor asked everyone to gather in the ballroom. The chandeliers glowed, casting sharp light across tense faces. A fire roared in the hearth. The snow outside reflected moonlight, trapping them in a glass house of truth. Eleanor spoke gently, but her words cut like razors. Richard Halston died because someone intended to kill another. The glass was switched. That is no accident, it is fate intervening. And since then, false clues have multiplied like weeds. A burned letter, a staged attack, a cordial laced with sedative, and another nearly fatal drink. Who benefits from these distractions? Who has woven them into a net to trap the innocent? She let silence stretch. All eyes drifted toward Clara. Clara laughed, but it sounded hollow. Again, Eleanor, how convenient to pin everything on the widow. Eleanor continued calmly. I wondered, at first, why the pearls? Why always your hand at your throat, tightening until the beads strain? Then I understood. It's not affectation, it's compulsion. Guilt manifests in gestures, and guilt cannot be silenced forever. Clara's face flushed red. You have nothing, no proof. On the contrary, Eleanor said softly, your proof is scattered across this very floor, pearls broken, lies unraveling, and now, a servant girl nearly dead because you could not stop yourself from tightening the noose. Blank, underscore, blank. Clara breaks. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Graves watched, torn between doubt and dawning belief. Clara stood rigid, breathing hard. Then, with sudden ferocity, she slammed her brandy glass onto the table, shattering it. You old witch, she screamed. You think you can judge me? Richard Halston was a vulture. He would have ruined me, paraded my debts before every creditor in New York. He deserved worse than poison. Gasps filled the room. Clara's chest heaved, eyes wild, pearls hanging in tatters from her throat. Eleanor didn't flinch. So you admit it? Clara's voice broke. I never meant for Richard to drink it. It was supposed to be Devereux. He'd have taken the blame, and Richard would have kept silent about my debts. But Halston stole the glass, and fate stole my chance. She crumpled into a chair, sobbing. The mask finally shattered beyond repair. Blank, underscore, blank. Aftermath. Graves stepped forward slowly, cuffs in hand. His face was grim, but his voice was almost gentle. Clara Fletcher, you are under arrest for the murder of Richard Halston. The room exhaled. Devereux sank into his wife's arms. Renshaw closed his eyes in relief. Alice Carter, pale but alive, whispered a prayer. Eleanor simply folded her notebook, tucked her pen away, and watched as justice, belated, but sure, was carried out. Clara's pearls lay scattered on the ballroom floor, white against the dark wood. A necklace never to be strung again. Blank, blank. Quiet resolution. The following morning, as guests prepared to leave Lakeview, Graves approached Eleanor. His pride was wounded, but his respect was genuine. I'll admit it, Mrs. Whitmore, he said gruffly. I looked for facts and nearly lost the truth. You looked at people, and caught the devil hiding in plain sight. Eleanor smiled faintly. You'll find, detective, that people betray themselves faster than facts ever will. All you must do is listen. With that, she pulled her shawl tighter against the cold, stepped into the waiting cab, and left the Lakeview Country Club behind. The storm was over, but the echoes of pearls breaking would linger in every heart that had heard them. Blank. The ballroom felt empty after Clara Fletcher's arrest. Though the scent of brandy and wood smoke lingered in the air, guests drifted back to their rooms, speaking in hushed voices, their relief fragile and incomplete. It should have been over, yet Eleanor Whitmore's mind refused to rest. She had seen too many crimes, too many tragedies wrapped in neat bows that unraveled later. Clara confessed. Yes, but confession and truth were not always the same thing. Blank. Clara in custody. Clara sat in the club's small billiards room, now serving as a makeshift holding cell until the police van arrived from the city. She looked oddly calm, as though unburdened, her pearls gone, her poise stripped. She seemed smaller, frailer. When Graves questioned her again, she repeated her confession almost word for word. Yes, I poisoned the glass. It was meant for Martin Devereux. Richard took it instead. I panicked, tried to redirect suspicion. I failed. Graves scribbled notes. Why Devereux? He knew too much. Clara said flatly. He and Richard both. If Devereux fell, I could survive. If Richard exposed me, I was ruined. Her eyes were hollow, her voice drained. Graves took it as finality. Eleanor did not. Blank. Eleanor's doubt. Later, alone in the library, Eleanor reviewed her notes. She tapped the pen against her ledger thoughtfully. Clara admitted poisoning. Motive. Debts. Exposure. Yet, poison in punch bowl. Or single glass. Alice nearly killed later. Why escalate if already caught? Did Clara act alone? The pattern nagged at her. Clara was clever. Yes, but reckless. Too reckless. The staging of letters. The false attack. The cordial, all too elaborate for a woman panicking on her own. Someone had helped her, or worse, someone had steered her. Blank. A conversation with Alice. The next morning, Eleanor visited Alice Carter in the kitchen. The girl still looked pale, but determination burned in her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, she whispered, thank you for saving me. If you hadn't spoken up, Detective Graves would have taken Mr. Devereux, and the real murderer would be free. Eleanor smiled kindly. It was your bravery that saved you, child, not I. But tell me, when you brought the cordial that night, who gave you the order? Alice hesitated. Mrs. Fletcher, but, she swallowed. It wasn't her voice I first heard. A man told me she wanted it. Mr. Renshaw. He stopped me in the corridor and said, take this to Mrs. Fletcher. Eleanor's pen froze mid-note. Jonathan Renshaw. Renshaw's shadow. Jonathan Renshaw had been quiet since Clara's arrest. Too quiet. Once his rival was accused. He seemed almost relieved, almost smug. Eleanor watched him from across the lounge. His posture relaxed, his eyes brighter. Freedom suited him too well. She approached with her gentle smile. You must feel lighter now, Jonathan. With suspicion lifted, Renshaw chuckled. I'd say justice lifted the weight. Clara sealed her fate with her own tongue. Indeed, Eleanor said softly, and yet justice sometimes requires a final stitch. Without it, the seam unravels. Renshaw frowned. You mean to say you still doubt? Not doubt, Eleanor replied. Certainty, that there's more to this story than one desperate widow and her debts. For the first time, Renshaw's smile faltered. Graves' resistance. When Eleanor told Graves what Alice revealed, he balked. Renshaw, no. The man had motive, yes, but no opportunity. Clara confessed. We've got her dead to rights. Eleanor shook her head. Confessions are not always complete. They tell what the confessor wants us to hear, or what another has coached him to say. Graves scowled. You want me to throw out a confession because a waitress overheard something? I want you to open your eyes. Detective. Renshaw was ruined. Yes, but ruin makes allies of the desperate. Clara needed someone to guide her, to deflect suspicion. Renshaw had the cunning. He whispered in her ear, nudged her hand, and when the noose tightened, she was left holding it. Graves rubbed his temples. God help me, woman, you make me doubt everything. Eleanor smiled faintly. Good. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom. Blank, blank. The missing ledger pages. That afternoon, Eleanor returned to Halston's office. She stared at the torn-out pages from his ledger, the empty scars in the book. Clara, perhaps, would have burned letters. But ledgers? No, those pages were too specific. Too businesslike. She knelt at the fireplace, sifting through ashes with a poker. A charred scrap clung stubbornly to the grate. She teased it free, the words barely legible, but enough. Transfer, Renshaw, property, outstanding debts. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't Clara's name in Halston's ledger. It was Renshaw's. Clara's debts were real, but Renshaw's dealings with Halston were more dangerous. Property transfers, fraudulent signatures, the kind of scandal that ruined reputations and sent men to prison. Eleanor slipped the scrap into her notebook. Blank, blank. Clara's final plea. That evening, Eleanor visited Clara in custody. The widow sat slumped, eyes dull. Why come? Clara asked bitterly. To gloat? No, Eleanor said gently. To listen. Clara's hands trembled. I did it. I poisoned him. But I didn't plan it all. I only followed. Followed whom? Eleanor asked softly. Clara shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. I can't, he said. He said if I spoke, he'd destroy me even in prison. Eleanor reached across the table, placing her hand lightly on Clara's. He already has. You owe him nothing now. But Clara only wept harder. Blank, blank. Eleanor's realization. Eleanor returned to her room and sat in the dark, piecing it together. Clara confessed to protect herself, but also someone else. Renshaw whispered to Alice, ordered the cordial. Ledger scrap tied Halston's threats to Renshaw, not Clara. Clara may have poured the poison, but whose hand guided hers? The truth settled heavy as snow on Eleanor's shoulders. Clara Fletcher had been the instrument. Jonathan Renshaw, the composer. Blank, blank. The gathering storm. Eleanor knew time was short. The police van would arrive by morning, and with it, the end of her chance to expose Renshaw. Graves might not listen, but Renshaw would not risk another chance at exposure. That night, she walked the halls of the Lakeview Country Club, shawl wrapped tight, footsteps echoing. The place felt haunted now, not by ghosts, but by secrets. And somewhere in the shadows, Jonathan Renshaw watched her. His eyes followed her every move. Blank, blank. The threat. Near midnight, Eleanor returned to her room to find an envelope slid beneath her door. She opened it carefully. Inside, a single pearl, smeared faintly with brandy, and a note scrawled in sharp handwriting. Stay silent, or you will join Halston. Eleanor's lips tightened. She held the pearl up to the lamplight. Clara's pearls, broken and scattered, now used as weapons of silence. But Eleanor Whitmore was not afraid. She had faced worse than threats in the dark. She set the pearl beside her notebook, closed the cover, and whispered to herself, tomorrow, the truth will have its day. Blank, blank. The dawn crept grey and cold over Lakeview. Snow softened the world outside, muting every sound. But inside the Lakeview Country Club, tension rang sharp as a struck bell. The police van was due within hours. Clara Fletcher would be taken away, her confession locked in ink and paper. Guests would scatter to Chicago, carrying stories of scandal and murder. But Eleanor Whitmore knew it wasn't finished. On her nightstand sat the single pearl and the note, stay silent, or you will join Halston. The handwriting was bold, angular, not Clara's delicate script. Jonathan Renshaw's hand. She had seen it in business documents framed on his office wall. Eleanor folded the note into her notebook. Today would be decisive. The final breakfast. The guests gathered one last time in the dining hall. Steam rose from coffee cups. Silver cutlery clinked. Voices murmured low. Everyone was weary, eager to leave. Clara sat apart, guarded, her face pale. She looked more broken than guilty. Jonathan Renshaw, by contrast, was almost buoyant. He carved into his ham with vigor, joked with a banker, and even winked at Lady Havenshaw. The picture of a man released from suspicion. Graves sat at the head of the table, gruff and satisfied. He had signed the paperwork for Clara's transfer. His work, he believed, was done. Eleanor buttered her toast slowly. Her eyes never left Renshaw. The confrontation begins. After breakfast, Eleanor approached Graves in the lounge. "Detective," she said quietly, "before you hand Clara Fletcher over, allow me 1 hour. 1 hour to show you the truth." Graves frowned. "The truth's already sitting in cuffs." "Then 1 hour will do no harm. If I fail, you'll have lost nothing. If I succeed, you'll have spared yourself a lifetime of doubt." Graves rubbed his jaw, then sighed. 1 hour, that's all." Eleanor nodded. "Gather everyone in the ballroom." The ballroom once more. The chandeliers glowed bright in the cold morning light. The guests assembled with visible unease. Renshaw confident, Devereux wary, Lady Havenshaw anxious. Clara slumped between two officers. Eleanor stood at the hearth, shawl drawn close, notebook in hand. "My friends," she began, voice clear, "we have come to believe this tale ended with a widow's confession. But confessions are tricky things. They may conceal as much as they reveal." Clara stirred, eyes darting nervously. Eleanor continued, "Mrs. Fletcher admitted to pouring poison. That much may be true. But who placed the idea in her mind? Who guided her hand, whispered in her ear, and stood ready to profit when the deed was done?" The room shifted uneasily. Renshaw chuckled. "Surely you don't mean..." Eleanor cut him off, her voice suddenly sharp. "Yes, Jonathan Renshaw, I mean you. Unmasking the architect. Gasps rippled. Renshaw's smile froze. "Preposterous," he snapped. Clara confessed. "Why would I risk everything when her debts gave her motive?" "Because Halston held your ruin in his hands," Eleanor said evenly. "The missing pages from his ledger named you. Jonathan, not Clara. Fraudulent transfers. Debts you could never repay. Halston was ready to destroy you." She held up the charred scrap. The words transfer, Renshaw, property, debts still faintly visible. Renshaw's face tightened, and Eleanor pressed on. "When suspicion fell on Clara, you encouraged it. You ordered Alice Carter to take cordial to her room, knowing she would be implicated if harm came. When Alice tasted it, she nearly died. And when Clara faltered, you sent me this." She lifted the envelope, the pearl gleaming inside. Every eye turned to Renshaw. Renshaw's collapse. Renshaw's bravado cracked. "This is absurd. A scrap of paper, a servant's mistake, a pearl anyone could have picked up, hardly evidence." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "Then why threaten me with Halston's fate if I spoke? Why hide behind Clara's broken necklace? Because you feared one thing above all, exposure. And now you are exposed." Clara suddenly cried out, voice raw, "It's true. He told me what to do. Said if I didn't, he'd ruin me and leave me penniless. I thought I'd save myself, but I only damned us both." Renshaw lunged toward her, rage twisting his face. "You fool, you should have kept your mouth shut." Graves stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "Enough. Jonathan Renshaw, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, and for the murder of Richard Halston." Renshaw froze, then sagged, the fight draining out of him. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed. For the first time, he looked like a ruined man. Clara's release. Later, in the billiards room, Graves removed Clara's cuffs. "You're not free of guilt, Mrs. Fletcher," he said gruffly. "You poured the poison, but you won't face the gallows alone. Renshaw will stand beside you." Clara wept, covering her face. "I never wanted to kill. I only wanted to survive. He used me." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Survival bought at such a price is never survival at all. It is only delay." Clara nodded through her tears. Graves concedes. As officers escorted Renshaw away, Graves lingered by Eleanor's side. His face was drawn, but his voice held reluctant admiration. "You did it again," he muttered. "I nearly walked straight into his trap. Devereux would have hanged, Clara would have carried the blame, and Renshaw would be sipping champagne by Christmas." Eleanor smiled faintly. You sought facts. Detective. He gave you plenty. But people always betray themselves. With every pearl that fell, Clara betrayed her guilt. With every silence, Renshaw betrayed his. You only needed to listen. Graves shook his head, half in wonder, half in resignation. I'll never understand how you do it. Eleanor's eyes softened. You don't need to understand, Harold. You only need to remember, truth lies not in papers, but in people. The departure. By noon, the police van carried Renshaw and Clara away toward the city. Guests departed one by one, their carriages crunching through the snow. The Lakeview Country Club, once glittering with holiday cheer, stood quiet and hollow. Eleanor sat by the window, watching the snowflakes fall. Lady Havenshaw approached. Will you return to Chicago with us, Mrs. Whitmore? In time, Eleanor replied. For now, I think I'll remain here a few days. The country air clears the mind. Lady Havenshaw hesitated. You frighten me sometimes, Eleanor. You see through people as though they're made of glass. Eleanor smiled gently. Glass breaks easily, my dear, but truth endures. Eleanor's reflection. That evening, alone in her room, Eleanor opened her notebook one last time. She wrote, Richard Halston, dead, but not intended. Clara Fletcher, guilty, but not alone. Jonathan Renshaw, the true hand behind the crime. Detective Graves, stubborn, yet honest. And myself, merely the observer, the listener, the weaver of threads. She paused, dipping her pen again. The storm has passed, but storms always return. Human frailty ensures it. Wherever pride, greed, and fear dwell, there too will murder, and wherever murder hides, perhaps an old woman may still be of use. She closed the notebook, placed it beside the single pearl she had kept. A reminder, not of danger, but of how easily facades shatter. Outside, the snow fell silent over Lakeview, covering every track, every scar, until spring would bring him to light again. Eleanor extinguished the lamp, drew her shawl tighter, and drifted into sleep. The truth, at last, was at peace.